$8 billion in bonding, borrowing, for a high-speed rail between San Francisco and Los Angeles. It's been a rocky 8 years. First of all, the cost estimates are now not 8 billion, but 80 billion. Now, 80 billion is just a number. Let me put it into perspective for you. $80 billion is 40 times what the federal government spends on all of Amtrak in 1 year. 40 times the subsidy for Amtrak. $80 billion is real money. Then you have the problem of the environmentalists. I love it when two left-wing groups, the technocrats and the environmentalists, go to war with each other. Anyway, it's been a mess. So here's the problem. The federal money for California was going to run out in March of next year, unless there was actual construction on the railroad. But there was no agreement on the railroad. There was no agreement on even the exact route. The San Francisco Bay Area, which is full of environmentalists, didn't want things coming through because you'd have to build new tracks, new construction. So the only way to build it would be to basically have it attached to the existing commuter rail lines, which operated about 60 or 70 miles an hour. In Los Angeles, you would have had to go through tunnels, lots of environmental lawsuits there, tunnels through the mountains to Los Angeles. But they couldn't resist. This federal money is sitting there, several hundreds of millions of dollars. So they had to start building. And in between San Francisco and Los Angeles is what used to be the breadbasket of America. It's called the San Joaquin Valley. It's where we used to grow lots of lettuce, and we used to grow lots of vegetables, we used to grow lots of fruits. Before there was a drought, and B, before the federal government decided that the Delta smelt and various other small little creatures were far more important than farmers, which is one reason why unemployment in many of those counties that I know so well, having lived there, is now 25%. But this was a bone that they were going to toss to the San Joaquin Valley. We're going to have 10,000 temporary construction jobs because we're going to build our section of the railroad in California. The only problem is they're going to build a 29-mile stretch. It is between the towns of Madera, which is this giant megapolis of 21,000 people, and Firebaugh, which is not far from Fresno. Firebaugh is as big as it sounds. It is 831 people. If you drive through, don't blink. So that's the California situation. But now there's a new wrinkle. It's called Texas. Now Texas, the Lone Star State, prides itself on its rugged individualism. So the private company that has started railroading in Texas has decided, well, we have a new wrinkle. We're not going to take federal money for anything. We're not going to take state money for anything. It's going to be completely privately financed, $10 billion project. And we will finance it completely through private means. It'll run from Dallas to Houston, and instead of a 4-hour drive, it will take only 90 minutes. And to throw in a stop to Texas A&M, which is very politically powerful in Texas, we're going to have a stop in College Station, so the college students can ride the rails home to Houston and Dallas. Well, the problem and Vice President Biden showed up in November and said, you are the future. This will be the first real rail project in the United States to be completed, and it will be wonderful, and this is the cutting edge, this is the future. Well, Ron Kirk, the former mayor of Dallas and the former trade representative for Barack Obama, was there, and he sort of spoiled the party because they asked him, well, isn't this amazing? You know, here you are, this longtime government official, and there's not going to be any government money in this. How is that possible? And he said, well, it all depends on what you mean by government money. We, of course, will not be asking for any grants, but loans are another matter. Loans, which, of course, are always repaid, always. So the Texas Railroad Company is already starting to use its eminent domain because Texas law allows for a railroad to seize property by eminent domain, otherwise things wouldn't get built. The only problem is the law says you can only do that if you're currently operating as a railroad company, which of course they're not. And they say, well, operating as a railroad company means a lot of things. It means planning to have a railroad company is operating like a railroad company, so we can avoid that law. Anyway, they're already trying to close down 1,400 parcels of land, either buy them out through eminent domain or seize them if the owners are unwilling to sell. I don't think this is going to happen either. They say that they're going to break ground. I'm dubious. There are 7 counties that the train track would run through between Dallas and Houston. In 6 of the 7 counties, the local officials are unalterably opposed to this. They believe it would be disruptive, it doesn't make economic sense, the business plan doesn't work out, and that ultimately the state taxpayers are going to be on the hook. Now, there's also still another objection. Even though Tesla has been in the news for negative reasons recently regarding the test drive about one of its cars, Tesla is still a well-respected company in many quarters in this country. Elon Musk says, no, 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 no. Don't use the Japanese train technology in Texas, because that's supposedly what they're going to use, getting an exemption from the Buy America Act. That technology is started in 1964. It's over 50 years old. The last update was 1998. That's old news. Why put in a 50-year-old technology? Let's do the Hyperloop, which is we're going to build tubes that will whisk people from city to city 700 miles an hour. So we're talking Los Angeles to San Francisco in 28 minutes. Now, I am a science fiction fan, and I do believe in I do believe in science, and I do believe the two often meet. That ultimately, the predictive value of science fiction can ultimately be achieved in real science. And I'm not going to say that Elon Musk is wrong. I'm also not going to wait to take a trip on it anytime in my lifetime. But once again, he himself says, no, no, there will be no government subsidies needed for this. So let me make my position clear. I believe in the future, I believe in technology, I believe you can do things better, and I certainly believe in building infrastructure. But nothing about this says that if it really makes economic sense, the private sector can't finance it. And if you're talking about more exotic technology like the Hyperloop, some government research and development money is certainly appropriate. Federal government has transportation R&D projects, fine. But remember that there are 152 high-speed rail projects in the world. Only 4 of them even make back their operating expenses. Only 4 out of 152. In fact, if you go to the California high-speed rail site, the official public agency that's promoting all this and building the choo-choo train from Firebaugh to Madera, you will see a report from the Spanish company that they were going to buy the trains from, Renfe. And the report is all there except for one paragraph, which says, we believe, having studied 152 rail systems around the country, that the California system will require permanent and rising subsidies. That one paragraph was left out of the report that was posted on the internet. I wonder why. Because it sort of gives the lie to what their whole program is. It has since been restored. So, I am for trains. I love high-speed trains, especially when other countries' taxpayers pay for them to wander around on my vacations and my business travel overseas. But here's the problem. The trains don't make sense in this country. And there is a reason for that. The infrastructure is enormously expensive. Now, admittedly, we have existing airports. Those cost money too. But the biggest infrastructure that a plane requires is called the air. It needs the air to travel. And airports are much less expensive than the actual technology and building of a railroad. So my view is healthy competition. We do subsidize airports and airplanes to some extent. I'm against that. I don't think that that principle should automatically apply to railroads or anything else, that those have to automatically be subsidized. Let's have as much of a level playing field as possible. If you can build a railroad and you can raise the financing for it, and you can find the technology and you can find a way to get around the Buy America Act, which I don't think is going to be repealed under either President Clinton or President Trump, fine, go build your choo-choo train. In the meantime, do not let us, the vast majority of taxpayers who earn an average of $50,000 per household in this country, subsidize a high-speed rail train that is going to be used by business travelers, by people of means, people who probably have way above average incomes. It is a subsidy from the lower middle class and the middle class to the upper middle class and to the rich. That's not what public policy should be about. And if people really want to fly, you know, through the air in a private jet, that's their business. They pay for it, but we should not have to pay for their private high-tech choo-choo train. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John. I was waiting because we had a few people still filtering in. We are going to be giving away a iPad, a new iPad that still in its box. It's not something that my children broke or anything like that. And what we need you to do, in fact, the gentleman is holding it up there in the back. You can see it's still got the saran wrap on it. This is an iPad 2. It's iPad Air 2, whatever they are. They're the newest thing. They're awesome. So what we need you to do is turn in a business card. Don't just write your name on a piece of paper, because that won't feel like a business card, and the person who grabs it out needs to all feel the same. So if you need to borrow a business card from a friend who's not so cutthroat as to tell you that by lending a business card to you and writing your name on the back of it, they've somehow helped you lessen their odds, then that's what you should do. So don't tear out a piece of paper and write it on that. It'll feel different and therefore not be chosen. He is going to walk around and collect those while I speak. I won't consider it rude either for him to walk around or for you to pass things to him and make this happen. It's important. We're glad you're here, and we want to reward you for having come. Anyhow, and I'm happy if someone needs, raise your hand. I'll throw you one of my business cards. You can use it, but make sure you get entered. You have to be here to win. So, yeah, we need name and contact. So we need your name, email, phone number type information. I don't need your social security number, your banking information. We don't want to do anything like that. But, anyhow, bottom line is you have to be present. We'll do this at the end. So don't send it in and then leave 5 minutes before hoping that your friend can claim it for you. If you're not here, we'll just pick another name and move on from there. All righty.
You have much better odds than any lottery you'll ever enter.
That's right. It's not 1,000,000 to 1. If I count it, your chances are somewhere in the neighborhood, I don't know, 1%. That's not too bad. It's
or
not
the room
1,000,000
downstairs, too.
Right. Yeah, and if you go down to the lobby and play some games down there, your odds won't be this good either. All righty. So, as I said, Westlake isn't your ordinary landfill story. It involves EPA failures and scandals. It involves the growth of government. It involves robbing taxpayers, padding the pockets of unions. It involves constitutional end runs. And on some level, it includes Congress being asleep at the wheel. So there's a lot to be learned here. It's not really about landfills. But the bottom line is, just to give you some basics, this landfill it started off in the 1930s during the Depression as a limestone quarry, became a landfill in the 1950s. You dig a big hole, later you fill it with something. That's what they did. And in the 1970s, early 1970s, some low-level radiological material from the Manhattan Project was put there. I'm not saying it was anything that you want to sprinkle on your cereal, but it's low-level stuff. So it's the sort of thing that anybody has determined is dangerous, and I'll get to that in just a second. In 1990, it was listed as a Superfund site. Now, you can do your math and realize that was a little while ago, talking, I guess, 26 years ago? So for more than 25 years at least, it's been studied and reviewed, but not much has been done, and therein lies the problem. So the locals complain a lot about the smell. I'm not sure, I've been to the dump. Take some yard waste to the dump periodically in my dump truck, and I'm glad I don't live next to the dump because I don't think it smells that good on a hot day. But that's not something that we need the federal government to be resolved on. You have composting waste or decomposing waste, and apparently in some areas it's smoldering 60 to 200 feet below the surface. That often happens. The Center for Disease Control says there's no health risk. You've got the Environmental Protection Agency saying the exact same thing, and you've got the state, local environmental groups saying the same thing. And if that's not enough, the Washington Post has reported that there's no credible link between air quality near this facility and disease and so forth. Again, clean bill of health. But nonetheless, the folks are worked up about it locally. They're concerned because headlines, when you hear radiological waste, you get worked up and you get worried about it. They don't like the smell. So the EPA's been finally got ready to solve this problem, okay? The EPA finally decided and they put together a plan. It involved a lot of different things. But what you have to understand in all of this is that for 25 years there's inaction. So the locals are upset. The locals are no longer that interested in working with the EPA because the EPA wouldn't meet with them, ignored them, etc. So local politicians have decided that they can step in and fix this. Of course, they won't fix it, they'll just rob you. But their plan, the EPA's plan, was to create a physical isolation barrier between the smoldering, decomposing waste and the area that has some nuclear byproducts in it. It's not burning in that direction, but this is just an abundance of caution. And then on top of that, to essentially encase the part that has the nuclear waste in it. So, and then of course continued monitoring in perpetuity largely, just to make sure that nothing's leaking out, there's no problems in groundwater or future problems. So a pretty reasonable solution. The EPA is, if anything, is probably going to be faulted with doing more than is needed than less, unless of course you look at the river up in Colorado, in which case they did a lot less than was necessary. But this is where the crazy stuff starts happening. This is Senator Claire McCaskill. This involves, of course, you've got your federal power grabs, you've got the growth of government, you've got the robbing of the taxpayers, the empowering and funding of unions, and of course, constitutional end runs. And this is how it came about. Because the locals are upset with the EPA and tired of waiting, now what they want to do is say, okay, EPA won't do cleanup anymore. We're going to have the Army Corps of Engineers do it. And that the Army Corps of Engineers doesn't normally do this stuff. So they would essentially job it out to, and they'd become kind of contract supervisors. And so what you'd end up with is union jobs, because they'd have the Bacon-Davis and so forth requirements, and they would end up hiring local unions to do the cleanup, being supervised by the Army Corps of Engineers. They, of course, would begin the process and study over again, because they have to, start over again. So the whole thing that the locals are frustrated about, i.e. long time, is going to continue in perpetuity, particularly since the EPA actually has its plan ready to go and was going to begin it early this year until this legislation began to be pushed on everyone. So this new plan will cost taxpayers about $400 million. The old plan had everyone who was responsible for the site paying for it, and the taxpayers were not on the tab. So anyhow, she wants all of this done without any congressional scrutiny. And that's what I love. This is so important, Congress shouldn't look at it. Do you make decisions that way? And that's not how my wife and I make decisions, like, oh, this is really important, so we should just kind of wing it. Let's just, anyhow, but so in the Senate it got passed it was basically passed the same way they passed National Donut Day. On National Donut Day, the federal government doesn't actually make you buy donuts. The federal government doesn't buy any donuts, just somebody puts it on the calendar and nobody cares, and so it's a declaration, it's National Donut Day. And I personally think every day should be National Donut Day, as you can, but you know what I mean. But this isn't National Donut Day. They're going to spend $400 million, and they're going to put this thing off and create a huge precedent for the growth of government in the future. And so that's the problem. It effectively becomes an earmark, quite frankly. So they've been trying to get through the House through the same sort of process, not looked at. And fortunately, the House has promised to return to regular order. Now, regular order may to you just sound like inside baseball, but it's not. It's actually return to constitutional government. Regular order is the idea that Congress has a job to do, that it's an equal, co-equal branch of government to the president and the administrative agencies and to the courts. And as a result, it has a role to play, and it should look at things and think about them. And it shouldn't just put things off, on a kind of, let's not look at this, it's like National Donut Day. So to me, it's important because as Congress reexerts itself and says we're not going to put up with this any longer, I think what you'll see is better government. When they look at things and say, hey, let's think about this, let's put it to the committee, let's have the committee review it, let's have the committee pick it apart and talk about whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. I mean, that's why Claire McCaskill says it's so important we shouldn't think about it, is she understands it's a boondoggle, and if anyone looks at it, they'll figure that out. So that's why, of course, we need to reinvigorate our system of checks and balances. So we, of course, have written a letter to Congress encouraging them to keep that commitment to return to regular order, because to us, it's a return to constitutionally limited government. Now, real reform, I would argue, is, of course, part just that returning to regular order. But I would argue, and John has written about this, this, by the way, is that river that the EPA messed up I guess last fall. They were told in advance this would be the problem. They were warned, don't do what you're doing, and they did it anyhow. But anyhow, so I would argue that, and John's written this whole point, which is let states do this. Every state has its own environmental protection. And I bet you that if this were a big issue in Missouri, where this landfill is, that if the state had been given authority to work on it, they would have fixed it before 26 years. And so that's one way to get this solved. But the bottom line is too often you have the EPA just preempting action and then nothing gets done. The left often pays lip service to the Constitution, and this is a portion of our letter where we point out this idea of Congress doing its job is part and parcel of the Constitution, so we encourage it. In the interest of time, I won't read it to you, but I've got copies up here. Anyone wants to see that letter? But the bottom line is, I want you to contact your representatives and insist on regular order. Insist on constitutionally responsible government. And let them know there shouldn't be any exceptions. And then finally, I would certainly argue that H.R. 4100 should not be placed on any suspensions calendar. It shouldn't get an easy slide through Congress. We should make sure that we've got this looked at carefully. By the way, we will have, and that's my remark, so I'm done, but I'm going to make sure that you understand we're going to have a few minutes for question and answer. So after Travis has finished his remarks, you'll have the opportunity to ask us questions and make sure that we've dealt with everything you want. Thank you so much.
Thank you, George. I'm going to I know we did a quick poll earlier. I want to do one other quick poll. Malcolm Wallop, how many people does that name ring a bell for? Okay. How about Paul Laxalt? So Frontiers of Freedom was founded by Senator Malcolm Wallop. One of his big issues was missile defense. And he was part of the group that introduced missile defense to President Reagan, then Governor Reagan, at Paul Laxalt's ranch right here in Nevada. So there's kind of a cool kind of local tie-in for this, and it's really an issue that is timely and prescient given that. So imagine this. You're sitting in your backyard one day, out of nowhere something comes flying from the sky, explodes, taking you out and everyone nearby. For all the libertarians in the room, I'm not talking about a Hellfire missile from a drone. I'm talking about rogue missiles from actors around the country, from around the world, and the threat is more real than you may think. The fact of the matter is that missile threats around the world continue to grow. Many countries view ballistic and cruise missile systems as cost-effective weapons and symbols of national power, as well as asymmetric threats to U.S. air power, and are investing heavily to expand their arsenals. Missiles are becoming so popular with America's potential adversaries, in fact, that the Missile Defense Agency estimates that the number of rogue missiles will grow from 6,300 in 2014 to 8,000 by 2020, a 30% increase, and will be more sophisticated in range and scope. The end of the Cold War seemed to signal a reduction in the likelihood of global nuclear conflict by rendering the concept of mutually assured destruction obsolete, which is basically where the U.S. relies on their response to deter other actors, but it did nothing to prevent the proliferation of ballistic missiles and weapons of mass destruction around the world today. While the macro picture is important, I think it's important to walk through some of the acute threats facing us around the world as well. In response to missile tests and provocations by the North Koreans, the U.S. recently decided to place a missile defense system in South Korea to defend our allies and tens of thousands of American troops stationed in the region. Just this week, they threatened physical action against the United States. The worst part is this may not be an idle threat. In 2013, the Defense Intelligence Agency assessed with moderate confidence that the North Korean government currently has nuclear weapons capable of delivery by ballistic missiles. Its most advanced missile can hit 6,200 miles away, enough to hit Alaska, Hawaii, and parts of the western United States. With some modifications, it could get up to a 9,300-mile range, which would be enough to strike all of North America. We're nearing the one-year anniversary of the disastrous Iran nuclear deal, and it relaxes restrictions on Iran's missile program and also lifts the restrictions on their ability to obtain nuclear material, and they should have that in a little less than a decade. Furthermore, I got a little ahead of myself there. Furthermore, intelligence reports indicate that Iran is one of the largest and most developed nuclear arsenals of any non-nuclear weapon state, and is also developing a covert long-range missile to carry payloads. Even more frightening, the Iranians and North Koreans are sharing resources and technology to jointly develop missile technology. Recent reports indicate the Russians are violating the New START treaty by not properly destroying missiles slated for elimination. And this isn't their first instance of treaty cheating in the last few years. In 2014, the State Department, after significant congressional prodding, verified that the Russian government also violated a 1987 intermediate range treaty developing illegal missiles. China, meanwhile, continues their march towards becoming a nuclear superpower. They're poised to deploy their first nuclear-armed submarine, which are virtually undetectable, and are developing a new missile which has MIRV capabilities, which basically means that several warheads come down, and it makes it much more difficult to target with missile defenses. So, should an American adversary manage to launch a successful attack and our missile defenses not be able to stop it, what would it look like? For conventional blasts, nuclear weapon yields vary from a few kilotons, and a kiloton is equal to 1,000 tons of dynamite, to several hundred megatons, which is 1 million tons. Each megaton is 1 million tons of dynamite. Rogue nations would probably possess weapons in the 10 to 100 kiloton range, while more advanced adversaries like China and Russia have those weapons in those megaton range. To put it in perspective, the weapons that leveled Hiroshima and Nagasaki were 13 to 15 kilotons. So we're talking several times. For the sake of argument, we'll talk and say what a 1 megaton explosion would look like. There are three main things that really happen. The first is the flash and the fireball, and then the blast, and then finally the fallout. So with the flash and fireball, when a nuclear weapon is detonated, an intense flash of light is released by a powerful pulse of heat radiation. It's so hot that it would cause flesh burns for anyone within a 15-kilometer range, set fire to any paint or wood within 7 kilometers. And this fireball is so bright that anyone looking in the direction within 80 kilometers could face either permanent or temporary blindness. Simultaneously released with the flash is a shock wave, which would kill 50% of people within 8 kilometers, causing major structural damage within 14 kilometers, and break windows as far out as 30 kilometers. So if you see this video, which is a popular one, what you're seeing there is not actually fire, flames, anything. That is just the pulse of air and the shock wave from the force of the explosion. How about the fallout? A nuclear blast releases a great deal of radiation at the time of explosion, but also leaves everything in its vicinity radioactive. The medical needs would be overwhelming. In a 1 to 2 million person city, roughly 1/3 of the inhabitants would be seriously injured. This would amount to 1/3 of all of the hospital beds in North America, and there would likely be 50 times as many cases of burns as there are burn beds in the entire country. The few hospitals that were not destroyed in the initial blast would be too overwhelmed to effectively care for these patients. So, simply put, the world remains a dangerous place, and at a time when Americans seem increasingly opposed to our use of force overseas, we must instead be sure we possess the means to defend ourselves from these attacks. In this time of increasing missile threats, it's important that we continue to invest in and modernize a layered missile defense system that's crucial to defending the homeland. I'll walk you through a few of these key components. The first is ground-based mid-course defense. This is our only protection against those long-range intercontinental missiles that have those yields in the megatons. They use an exo-atmospheric kill vehicle, which uses the kinetic energy to destroy a target, basically hitting a bullet with a bullet. The Army-Navy, the TPY-2 radar is a highly capable radar that's forward deployed, and that searches between real risks and benign objects. So powerful it can detect, track, and distinguish objects smaller than a basketball from over 1,000 miles away. They're forward-based, like I said, to scan for attacks, and when there are imminent threats, such as what's happening with North Korea right now, they can be forward-based with a THAAD battery and paired with this radar. One such battery also exists in Guam, where it's basically going to be permanently stationed to protect against any of these North Korean missiles that come flying. Other systems, such as the Patriot missile, have a long legacy of defending America. Since the first Gulf War, it's played a crucial role in defending our soldiers. It's highly mobile and can be deployed in less than an hour. It's also shifting the cost of missile defense, the cost burden of missile defense, as a lot of our allies are pouring their own resources into it. and are more closely partnering with us to defend themselves against the attack. It's the system of choice for 13 allies worldwide, and this cost-sharing mechanism not only brings more nations to the table, but it makes it more affordable for all partners, keeping us ahead of missile threats without breaking the bank. So missile defense will never be 100%, but it doesn't necessarily have to be in order to be successful. As long as we can inject considerable doubt into the mind of our adversaries regarding the effectiveness of their attack versus our response, these systems are doing their job. That's why we need to make funding for a layered missile defense that can combat these increasing threats a priority. The costs would be too high to allow a world in which dictators and oligarchs are allowed to threaten Americans in their own backyards. We are not safer, and the world is not more secure if America cannot properly defend itself from growing threats. With your help, we can finish constructing the missile shield that President Reagan envisioned when he called upon the scientific community to, quote, turn their great talents now to the cause of mankind and world peace to give us the means of rendering these nuclear weapons impotent and obsolete. Thank you very much.
Alrighty, we have a few minutes for question and answer. So what I'd ask is that you ask questions, not give necessarily alternative speeches because we only have a few minutes. And but feel free to ask questions, and then the person who is best suited to answer it will do so. So let's jump on that real quick.
Oh, hello. I'm Richard, and one thing I was wondering on the high-speed rail, what if we had on the wall that Trump is going to build between Mexico and the United States and run a high-speed rail right down there, and that way we can have support on the right and the left. The left would get their high-speed rail. By the way, you're free to use that joke at any time. No attribution is necessary.
I know that somebody would say, well, even though the business plan doesn't make sense, at least it would create jobs.
Oh, and by the way, the most important point: Mexico will pay for it.
I call that the friendliest of amendments, and I will steal that with abandon.
Okay.
And if you want credit, apply to me.
Okay. On a more serious note, on the SDI issue, the nature of technology has changed a great deal. So, right now, it's like Tom Clancy once described about, terrorism with nuclear weapons. Just smuggle it in looking like 1,000 pounds of cocaine. And you can get it into any major American city. But I actually think if you did have a response from a North Korea and so forth, they're not going to saber rattle and tell you that they're launching, they'll take credit for it afterwards. What's most likely to happen? A city blows up, and no one steps forward and says, "Hey, I did it." And also, you also have like commercial aviation. You could have a warhead go into a 707, a G5 Learjet, things of that nature. It can either be a suicide mission or remotely controlled.
Well,
Right.
so I think there are two things to note. The threat from terrorism is more the dirty bomb and the radiation as opposed to an explosion per se. Most of the rogue nations that possess these capabilities, the warheads are relatively large because they have not been able to miniaturize it yet.
But these other approaches are more likely to be successful and cheaper. Why would I think they do the missile programs for national prestige, to be able to have a parade and have the missile carriers go out there, and you're part of the big boy.
Well, what I would argue, we don't want to have an ongoing back and forth. Let me just suggest this. There are lots of ways our enemies can get us. And what I think you're suggesting is they can come in through the front door, they can come in through windows, maybe they can come down like Santa Claus down the chimney. But the fact that there's multiple ways to get in the house doesn't mean we shouldn't block off as many of them as we can. And the reality is an EMP, for example, attack could be from a cargo ship. They could shoot a small, a fairly simple missile up into the atmosphere, fairly small warhead, blow it up, and pretty much destabilize everything we've got going. Not even your cars won't work. So, but missile defense can protect against that as well. So I'm not suggesting that the dirty bombs and things you talked about are not important, but the fact that they are important, I don't think diminishes the importance of missile defense. So, but anyhow,
We currently, I'm Ford Fisher from Tax Revolution Institute. We currently spend and plan to spend an enormous amount of money on nuclear weapons, the argument being that if we have the nukes, then people won't nuke us because we can nuke them back. If we've created sufficient nuclear defense systems, is that an argument for our own non-proliferation?
I would say that it is on some level. I still think we have to have some deterrent because I think Senator Wallet made the argument that MAD really was MAD. And I agree with him on that. His point was none of us defend our homes that way. We don't put a sign on our door that says, if you rob my house, I'm going to come rob yours. Right. We all do things, put locks on the door, do things to keep the bad guys out.
Right, we'd rather.
So I think that certainly as we do that, there was a time when our sole deterrent was nuclear weapons. I would argue that as we create effectively can lock the door, we don't need as much. But I'm not sure we need nothing. So I wouldn't argue zeroed out, but I definitely think that you're right, that as we can transition to, and I think he made the argument, it was a moral argument. If you have the capacity to defend yourself and prevent the attack, then it is morally incumbent upon you to do so. And the failure to do so is just wrong. And that was his, and I totally agree with him on that.
Right. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Yes, if this talk were being given in any other country about the United States, I could understand the saber rattling and the aggressiveness. It's the United States that has dropped atomic bombs on innocent civilians. It's the United States that is bombing, running these drones from a few miles from here.
I understand.
And
can you give us a question?
It's caused the development of ISIS.
Fair enough.
It's the United States that's attacked 200 countries since its
we can have
creation.
I'm not prepared to necessarily have a counterpoint. I wanted to question, but what I will address is I will say it is true factually that we dropped 2 nuclear weapons on Japan. Whether or not those were innocent civilians and so forth is a topic that's complicated and we can have a conversation. But I do not think that, I don't agree with most of what you've said in the sense that somehow America is the big problem in the world in creating instability. I think if you
America is the terrorist nation of the world.
Okay. Well, okay, that's fine.
Does anyone else have a question?
Yeah, you haven't asked a question yet. You're giving an alternative speech, and if you'd like to host your own session, you can do that. But I think at this point, I need to ask if there's any other questions. I do not agree that we're a terrorist nation. It doesn't mean I agree with every foreign policy decision we've made.
200 wars.
Sir?
You don't consider that to be a terrorist nation?
I do not.
If any other country did it?
Sir?
China has attacked 2 countries in 3,000 years.
Okay.
I'll leave it with one closing thought. It is true that we have fought in a lot of wars. We've never taken more land than what's been needed to bury our dead for making the world a safer place.
We have not made the world a safer place. We made it a dangerous place.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you.
We didn't have any chance. Did ISIS exist in Iraq?
Sir.
Please be courteous.
We have one more.
Hi, Pat Rosensteel, National Popular Vote. Just a quick question on the Superfund. If you have the states responsible for the cleanup, would that be state funded or is part of the solution federal funding to match state dollars, or
Well, normally,
how could that get
absolutely.
implemented?
And John can also, I think, speak to this question, but very good question. Superfund normally goes to the people who caused the problem in the first place and holds them accountable. And so I think that model makes sense. And so generally the goal of it is to not have the taxpayer have to foot the bill. And so if the states are given responsibility for it, you would have them follow that same model, and they would have the perpetrators of the situation pay for it.
The one thing we do know is, having given responsibility for this to the Environmental Protection Agony, it's been 40 years since these sites were identified in almost all cases, and a large number of them have not been cleaned up. And I think that in the writing that I've seen on this, part of this is because certain unions don't want the cleanup unless they get the majority or all of the jobs that are created from it. And I think that's a terrible, terrible thing, that a special interest puts its own welfare ahead of potentially the health and safety of the local community, or at least its ability to clean up an eyesore.
Absolutely. I believe our time is up, so we need to have our drawing now. I want to thank you all for your being here. We've got anybody who's been here who failed to get their card in, make sure you get in right now because we're drawing in the next few seconds.
Who? Oh, really?
Here, and then let me give you one of mine. You can write the name on the back of it. But you got to get it in quickly.
It's gonna be the
Anyone
lucky
else need
one
a
right
business
there.
card so you can get in? Sir? Now, real quick. Name and contact information. Yeah, name and contact information. Oh, okay. There you go. Anyone else? Last chance.
No, it's right on your shoulder.
While we're doing that, I would like to say we have former Congressman Barr here, and I really appreciate him being here. For those of you who are friends of liberty, this was a man who spent a lot of time defending the Constitution, and I want to say kudos to you, sir. Thank you so much for doing that.
How are the cigars? We gonna fight that FDA regulation?
I am.
I'm with you.
Okay, so is there anyone here under 15? There's no one here under 15.
That no one that could not be accused of being, cheating. She is. Okay. No, but you're.
Yeah, your staff. Maybe you should do the drawing.
And Jason Castella.
Congratulations.